Hi, welcome to this sheet music tutorial. I will try my best to give you a simple and understandable path to follow, where you hopefully at the end of this path will be able to understand sheet music a little better. Before I start, I want to press the fact that learning to read sheet music takes time. The more time you spend on it, the more you will understand. And it's important to allow yourself to take it in step by step, and not pressure yourself to understand it all at once. Memorizing and learning all the information in this lesson all in one sitting is impossible. Unless of course your name is Mozart and have been brought back from the dead and need to learn how to read sheet music all over again. What you need to know before you learn to read sheet music is the key names, especially the white keys and where they are located on the piano. If you haven't memorized this yet, you will need to take one step back and start by doing that. In this lesson, I will start off by explaining the grand clef before I go through the white keys and where they are located in the sheet music. I will then go through the black keys with the sharps and the flats, followed by what kind of notes we got, before ending it with some general things that might occur on paper when sitting in front of a bunch of sheet music. So, finally, it's time to get started. First, you need to understand the difference between the treble clef and the bass clef. This is something that can be hard to get at first, but it will make more sense the more you get used to it. The treble clef is here on the right, and the bass clef is here on the left. Generally speaking, the treble clef shows you the notes that are to be played with your right hand, and the bass clef the notes that are to be played with your left hand. Both the treble clef and the bass clef consists of 5 lines and 4 spaces. In between the treble clef and the bass clef there is some air to keep them separated. What you don't see in this image is that there is in fact another line right there in between the treble clef and the bass clef. When there aren't any notes on this middle line, it will stay invisible. Now I'll show you this line so you can see it for yourself. In reality, it's like in the top example here, with a smooth transition, where the lines and spaces just run over into each other over and over again. But because this is almost impossible to view and understand, some air has been given for the clefs to breathe, as you can see in the bottom example. If you also take a look at the 2 very first notes, you can see those notes are actually located on that invisible line we just talked about. As a basic rule, the note located on this middle line will always be the middle C. There are exceptions to this rule of course, as with almost everything, but you will probably not meet these exceptions for a long time. If the sheet music wants you to play this middle C with the right hand, the note will be placed with a tiny line going through it closely beneath the bottom line of the treble clef. If the sheet music wants you to play this middle C with your left hand, the note will be placed again with this tiny line going through it, closely above the top line of the bass clef. And remember, this is the exact same note, the middle C, something that might be hard to understand in the beginning. You can almost view this middle C as the link between the treble clef and the bass clef. In this basic lesson, I won't go into details about these lines, but these kinds of invisible lines are actually located above the treble clef and beneath the bass clef as well, showing up with that tiny line going through the note if there is a note to be played on that line. But again, this isn't very important to learn and understand when learning the basic rules of sheet music, and it will be a lot easier to relate to once all the basic theory has been learned. Now that you understand more about the treble clef and the bass clef, we will move on to where the notes are located and how you should link the notes on paper to the keys on your piano. Again, to get this down, it's important that you know the names of all the white keys and where they are located on your piano. As you already know, the middle C will be located on the line that is right there, in between the treble clef and the bass clef. The middle C is simple enough, the C closest to the middle of your piano, almost right below your nose. The notes you will learn to spot here are the notes closest to the middle C, either to the right or to the left of it, based on if you look at the treble clef or the bass clef. The first rule to learn is that there is notes on the lines and there's notes in the spaces between the lines, as you can see from the image presented on the screen. I will now present 3 approaches you can take to get to know the system better. The first approach is one of the most straightforward ways to actually learn where the notes are on the sheet music, and that is to use this image and memorize it, every single note that you see in front of you. This will of course take some real determination over a couple of days, where you work on it until you learn it by heart. Then the second approach. This approach wants you to memorize rhymes. This is a way for you to get a slightly different approach when it comes to memorizing where the notes are. Some feel that this is the easiest way, because using this formula you will only need to memorize 1 word and 3 sentences. In the image you see now, I have divided the notes into 4 main areas. 2 areas for the treble clef and 2 areas for the bass clef. 1 to memorize the 4 spaces and 1 to memorize the 5 lines. In the first area you can see that in the treble clef the 4 spaces spell the word face, telling you that the notes in these 4 spaces are the F, A, C and E. Then in the second area you can learn the sentence "Every good boy does fine", and you will know all the treble clef notes that are located on the lines E, G, B, D and F. Then moving on to the bass clef. In the third area you memorize the 4 bass clef spaces, and we get the sentence "All cars eat gas", A, C, E and G. And finally in the fourth area we got the 5 bass clef lines that will spell out the sentence "Good burritos don't fall apart", G, B, D, F and A. Then lastly I will share the way I memorized it when I taught myself sheet music some years ago. Looking back, I think you should go with one of the 2 previous methods, since this one will take a bit longer for you to get it all in. But what I did was that I memorized only the middle C. You should by now know where the middle C is, both on the piano and in the sheet music. What I did was that I counted up and down the piano from this middle C. The lines and the spaces are all 1 step up or 1 step down. So if you are on a line and go 1 step up or down, you are now on a space. If you go another step up or down from that space, you will now be on a line, and so on. Line, space, over and over again in each direction. When looking at the example in front of you, you are now on the middle C. So by looking at the treble clef, if the note you are trying to find in the sheet music is the note located on the space below the first question mark, what you have to do is count spaces and lines until you are on that space. From the middle C to the next space we got 1. Then to the bottom line we now got 2. Then 1 more step to get onto this space and we have now counted to 3, right? Then you turn to your piano and basically do the exact same thing. You locate the middle C almost below your nose. You're now going to count up 3 white keys. 1 and we are on the D. 2 and we are on the E. Then 3 and we are now finally on the F, the note we were trying to find. So the amount of lines and spaces we are able to count in the sheet music from the middle C will tell us how many white keys we have to count on the piano from the middle C to find the key we are looking for. This will of course work in both directions, both up the piano or down the piano. And in the beginning, just count from the middle C. This is a very time-consuming approach when trying to learn a piece of music, but it can aid you in the beginning if you just can't memorize all the note locations or the sentences for each of the 4 areas. To just complete the example, we are going to continue from the F. We now want to find the next space, located beneath the second question mark. Again, we count lines and spaces. 1 line and 1 space equals a total of 2. Then we go to the piano, and from the F we just found on the piano, we go 2 white keys to the right and we land on the A. Then finally, we are trying to find a note located on the line beneath the last question mark. Again, we count 1 line, then 1 space, then 1 more line, equals a total of 3. Back to the piano to count the white keys from the A we just found. 3 white keys to the right and you are on the D. As long as you don't skip any lines for spaces when you count, you will be able to find any note you want on the piano. And after a while you will memorize other notes and automatically know where they are on the piano. And then you will be able to start from new notes when counting up and down. But the middle C is at least a beginning. And remember that you are of course allowed to use this image that you see in front of you now as a cheat sheet in the beginning. Then it's time to move ahead to the black keys. These black keys are the sharps and the flats. Before you try to learn the sharps and the flats, I recommend that you now know the white keys and are comfortable with the white keys. If you haven't gotten the general idea down of the white keys, it's very hard to start figuring out the black keys. But if you now understand the basic rules of where the white keys are located in the sheet music, then the black keys theory will be rather easy. As I said, the black keys are basically sharps and flats. What you need to know is that if you see a sharp in front of a note in the sheet music, you will have to move up the piano to the right with 1 semitone, which is also called a half step. However, if you see a flat in front of a note in the sheet music, you will have to move down the piano to the left with 1 semitone. You're probably wondering, what does this actually mean? What is this semitone or half step? As you can see from this chart that I have created, we got both whole tones and semitones. It's not that important for now to learn the whole tones, but it will help you understand the semitones a bit better. The thing is, when moving up or down the piano with 1 semitone, you will always move to the very next key. In general, this means that if you're on a white key, you will always move up or down to the black key right next to it. But there are 2 minor exceptions. If you take a look on the chart to the right, you can follow the whole tone patterns and the semitone patterns by following the same color. In general, as I mentioned, you will only run into sharps and flats that will skip you onto the black key next to the white key you are on. But let's just quickly go through the chart step by step. We start on the C. 1 semitone to the right and we are up on the black key. We now call this a C sharp. Then we move another semitone to the right and we are down on the D again. 1 more semitone and we are once again up on the black key, the one to the right of the D. This is now the D sharp. Another semitone brings us back down to the E, and now we run into the exception. The thing is that when we now move one semitone to the right, we are not going to jump to the black key. If we were to go from the E to the black key on the right, we would actually not be moving by semitones anymore. This would instead be jumping twice as long, meaning we would now be moving by a whole tone to the right. And since we are only going to move by one semitone at a time, we will instead be located on the very next key, that in this instant will be another white key, the F. Then, when we move another semitone, we will once again be back up on the black key, naming it the F sharp, then so on and so on. From the chart you can see that the second time a semitone won't bring us up on the black note or the black key is when you're on the B, because a semitone to the right from the B will land you on the C. These exact same rules work when we move down the piano as well. Moving up the piano to the right is when sharps appear, and moving down the piano to the left is when the flats appear. And remember, moving by sharps and flats means that you will skip one half step or a semitone to the very next key. But I won't leave the sharps and flats just yet. I will now show you this image to give you some examples on how this actually works on the sheet music. And for fun, I'll put in a couple of those exceptions to the rule to spice things up a bit. Let's start down below in the bass clef. The very bottom note located on the space right below the bottom line, if it was natural, meaning there weren't any sharps in front of it, we would now know that this is an F. But because there is a sharp in front of it, we now move up with one semitone to the right, landing on the black key right above it on the piano, now called F sharp. Now to the second example. This note located on the second line in the bass clef is originally a B. But now, since there is a sharp in front of it, we move up one semitone to the right and we land on the very next key. As you know, usually this will be a black key, but in this case it's a white key, the C. Then the third example is a note on the second line from the bottom in the bass clef. It's the D. The sharp appears once again, kicking it up to the right, landing again on a black key right next to it, now called D sharp. Now let's do the three examples where flats appear instead of sharps. We should by now know that flats move the other way. They move the note down one semitone to the left on the piano. So when we take a look at the note located on the space right below the bottom line in the treble clef and see the flat in front of it, we now move down one semitone and land on a black key right next to it. This will now be the D flat. The second flat appears in front of the note located on the third space from the bottom, the C. Move it down one semitone, not jumping to the black key below the C, since that would be skipping the note right next to the C, so we now end up on the B. Then moving on to the very last example. We are now on the note that is located on the space right above the top line. This is a G, but with the flat in front of it, one final time we move down to the left with one semitone to the black key right next to it. And now we call this black note the G flat. What you probably have picked up on by now is that we name the black keys after the original note, and if it's either a sharp or a flat present. This means that in reality, if we were to take a look at the black keys chart one last time, that the same black key can in fact be both a C sharp and a D flat at the same time. It's the exact same note, so that you don't get confused if this ever comes up. This rule applies for all the black keys. Now that you can locate the notes on paper and link the notes to where they are on the piano, we need to go into the different kinds of notes you will run into when learning pieces from sheet music. We got the whole note, the half note, the quarter note, the eighth note, and the 16th note. And for each note there is an equally valued rest. As you can see on the right, the whole note is the king of the hill. And what we need to do to understand the length of these notes is that we need to apply some very basic mathematics. 2 half notes will take up the same amount of time as the 1 whole note. 4 quarter notes will take up the same amount of time as the whole note as well. The same goes with 8 eighth notes and 16 16th notes. I'll give you examples so that you are able to see what I mean even more clearly. Let's start on top. We noticed that we got a time signature in the very beginning of the piece, and that there's several vertical lines that separates the notes. The lines indicate the start and the end of each measure, also called bars. In general, every single bar or measure will take the exact same amount of time to finish. Meaning that if you use 4 seconds getting through the very first bar, you will use 4 seconds on the second bar, the third bar, and so on. No matter how many notes are in that bar, or even what kinds of notes are in that bar. The time to play the bars will always be the same. Then back at the time signature you see in the beginning. In the top example, we got one of the 2 most common time signatures, the 4/4. The 4 on top means that there are 4 beats per bar. The bottom 4 means that the note we are going to play on each beat is the quarter note. This is almost easier to understand if you take a look at the third bar in this example. The reason is that in this bar we got the quarter notes, and as you can see there are 1 quarter note on top of each beat. So that you'll easier understand, I'll give you a chance to see the beats, indicated here by the red dots. This will not be visible in the sheet music, but by understanding the time signature at the beginning, you will now know how many beats there are and how they work. As you see in the first bar, the whole note will on its own take up all 4 beats, meaning it will last for a full length of that bar. In the second bar, we now have to deal with the half notes. As we now know, we can fit 2 half notes in the same amount of space and time as the whole note. These 2 half notes will also take up 4 beats. The first half note played on the first beat, and the second half note to be played on the third beat. Both notes lasting for 2 beats. Then we are back on the third bar. The quarter notes only lasts for 1 beat. And since we are in the time signature of 4/4, we are able to fit 4 of them in to 1 bar, each to be played on each beat. Then we got the 8 notes. Now we are able to fit 2 of these notes on each beat, since each 8th note lasts half as long as the quarter note. And finally, now in the 5th bar with the 16th notes, we are actually able to fit 4 of these notes onto 1 single beat. I will now give you an example on what these bars would sound like. First, I'll let you hear a bar without any notes but only the beats, so that you get a feel of the tempo. That was how long 1 bar would last. Now I'll play an example where you will listen to these 5 bars with the beat playing as well. Remember that when you sit in front of the sheet music, you are the one that have to count the beat. In 4/4, count 4 times. But now, let's hear these 5 bars. Notice that the tempo is exactly the same for each bar or measure. The beat hits 4 times in each bar. What changes is how many notes we can play in each bar, since the notes themselves got different values. I'll play the example one last time. Now we move on to the other one of the two most common time signature. It's the 3/4 that you see in the bottom example. As you now know, if the time signature is 4/4, you got 4 beats to complete the entire bar. But in 3/4 we only got 3 beats. This means that instead of counting to 4, you now count to 3. Again, because the bottom number is 4, the quarter note is still being the referenced note. So as you know, because of this, in 4/4, you could fit 4 quarter notes into one bar. But since this is 3/4, we can now only fit 3 quarter notes into one bar. Again, take a look at bar 3 in the bottom example. What you will see in the first bar is that we are no longer able to use the whole note. It's really not that hard to understand why, since the whole note will take up 4 beats. And we now only got 3 beats to work with. The whole note is just simply too big. So in 3/4 we won't be facing any whole notes. You will, however, face the dotted half note. Don't be too scared if this seems hard to get at first. This note is just slightly harder to understand than your average normal half note. And what you should know is that it's actually possible to meet dotted notes in all kinds of values. Half notes, quarter notes, 8 notes, and so on. The fun thing about the dotted note is that you can now add half of its own value on top of it. If you don't get it right away, it's okay. But as you know, the quarter note is half the value of the half note. I'll say that again. The quarter note is, as you know, half the value of a half note, right? The half note taking up 2 beats, while the quarter note takes up 1 beat. Simple math. So then the dotted half note will last as if it was the value of a half note and a quarter note. As you can see from the first bar in the bottom example. The dotted half note takes up all the 3 beats that are in that bar. Then we got the second bar, where we got 2 different notes to fill this bar up. A half note and a quarter note. Back at the third bar, we see that the quarter notes take up a full beat on its own, meaning we can fit 3 quarter notes in. And in the fourth bar, we can again place 2 of these 8 notes on each beat, resulting in a total of 6 8 notes taking up the entire bar. And finally, in the last bar, we got the 16th notes. Again, there is 4 of these on each beat. But since we only got 3 beats in this time signature, we are faced with 12 of these 16th notes to take up the entire last bar. Now you'll get to hear this being played with a beat playing as well. First, a bar where you hear the 3 beats only. And now you get to listen to all the bars in the bottom example. This is something that will be easier to understand and get the hang of the more experience you get at the piano, playing music. Before ending with some general things you might see in sheet music, I will touch on the key signatures without going too deep. There are key signatures for every single key, and how to spot what key signature a piece is written in, you need to take a look at the sharps and the flats in the very beginning of the score, right there in front of the time signature. In time, you will pick up more and more key signatures. You can memorize them right away, but that's not that important in the beginning. It's more important that when you got the sharps and flats down, that you understand the basicness surrounding the key signature. In the first example, if you know the note placements on the lines and spaces, you will know what note is originally on that line, where the sharp is located. It's the F. This means that in this piece, every single F is automatically sharped just by being an F. Meaning, you won't find a sharp in front of the F if Fs appear in the piece. But still, the Fs will need to be raised by one semitone up on the black key when you face them in the sheet music. In the second example, the sharps are located on the C and the F. Again, every single C and F in this piece will automatically be raised with one semitone up the piano to the black key right next to it. Again, since the key signature is telling you what notes are sharped, you will not see any Cs or Fs with a sharp in front of them in this piece. These are of course not the only two key signatures with sharps in them, but I'm not going to go through every single one of them in this lesson. In the third example, you can spot that there is a flat in the key signature. This is located on the line, and you might already know that the note on this line is a B. So in this piece, every single B is flat and lowered with one semitone. Lastly, we find 4 flats in this example. They are located on the A, B, D, and E. In this key signature, every single one of those notes, when seen in the score, will automatically be lowered with one semitone. And remember, since we already got this information in the key signature, we will not see a flat in front of these notes when they appear in the sheet music later on. And finally, a last thing about keys and key signatures. If you want to know what key the piece is in, you should look at the very first note that the piece starts on. Of course, another rule with exceptions, but in the basic pieces you will face when starting to learn sheet music or music in general, this is the general rule to follow. So if the piece starts on a C, this piece is either in C major or C minor. Then, if there isn't any sharps in the key signature, you know for a fact that this is a piece in C major, simply because of the two reasons: that C major did not got any sharps at all, and that you know the piece starts on a C. These two details will almost always together point out the key signature. Since the key signature for A minor is 100% the same as C major, no sharps or flats, the starting note will be important for you to separate if it starts in A minor or C major. But as we already know in this example, the piece started on a C, so again, this piece will therefore be in the key of C major. Then, finally, let's casually talk about the different things you might see in different pieces. Often there will be dynamic markings to tell you if you should play it soft or not so soft. You could pause this to read about all the minor variations, but basically triple P's wants you to play it really soft and triple F's very loud. Usually you'll meet only a P to indicate that you should play it normally soft. Then you get the crescendo. If this appears, you should gradually play louder, and if you meet the diminuendo marking, you should play gradually softer. Again, you can pause this image to read closer if you want, but I'll just run through all of it in a casual manner. At the start of a piece, you might see the metronome mark, which indicates how fast you should play the piece. You can also meet terms like lento, adagio, or presto. These will also try to tell you something about the tempo. Lento and adagio is rather slow, presto is quite fast. Then we got the tie. In this case, if the two notes are tied together, you will not play the second note. But you should hold the first note, in this case, twice as long. This tie indicates that you need to add the note values together, so that they together create one note that lasts longer. These come in many different combinations. Then you got a slur. This means that you should try to move from one note to the next with a smooth, sweeping motion. The glissando is not very common, but this tells you to glide from the very bottom key to the last key on top, with your hand touching every key in between on its way up. The triplet is also a bit unusual in a beginner piece, but you will meet it rather quick. The triplet tells you to break the laws of the beat within a bar. Normally, these 3/4 notes would take up 3 beats of that bar, but now you will actually play these 3/4 notes in the place of 2 beats. You could say to play them slightly faster than you normally would. It's important that all 3 notes still got the same value accordingly to each other. All of these 3 notes will last for the same amount of time. It's the total time it takes to play these 3 notes that will take up less time. As mentioned, they will take up 2 beats instead of 3. Then you got the neutral. This might appear in bars where a note has been sharped or flatted at some point. In this case, the F has been sharped at one point. Now, when this neutral appears, you cancel the sharpening of this F. Meaning, instead of playing the black note one semitone to the right of the F, you bring it back down to play a natural F. Then the staccato. This indicates that the note should be played in a manner as if the note or the key is very hot. Pretend that this note will burn your finger when you touch it. So when you play it, you need to thrust your hand or finger back up into the air quite fast to avoid getting burned. And then you got the accent, meaning you should play the note with extra strength or make it stand out in the crowd. And the very last thing I will talk about is your fingers, since you might meet a number here and there in the pieces you learn. These numbers tell you what finger you should play the note with. In this image, you can see what number is linked to what finger. Actually pretty simple. The number starts on your thumb and you just count chronologically outwards towards the pinky. Then we are all done. If you made it this far, you have done very good. Be sure to keep going, because it's almost impossible to get all of this all at once, as I've mentioned before. Try to focus on one area at a time until you really understand it. Then move on. And remember that you can always come back to this lesson if you forget something. So, thank you very much for watching. Hope you learned something. And the only thing I ask of you is that you share this video to help spread some knowledge. Knowledge is key. Some say the key of E major. Take care.